happening, tabletop gamers? My name is LeunameGames. Welcome back to LeunameGames. Today I'm going to teach you how to play the 2 to 4 player worker placement game Stone Age by Bernd Brunnhofer and published by Hans im Gluck. In Stone Age, players are all a tribe living in the Stone Age just like our ancestors. But unlike our ancestors, at least some of them, your goal is to hopefully build up. And you're going to do that by gathering resources, hunting animals, and acquiring knowledge to hopefully bring your civilization to the next level. Let's get to the table and let's see what's in the box. In order to set the game up, you're going to have to place the main board in the center of your playing area. This board represents the areas that the players are going to be working with and are trying to gather all these resources up here: wood, brick, stone, and gold. And they're also trying to get at this knowledge down here, whether it's trying to build your agriculture up, or get new tools to work with, or getting new civilization cards, which I'll explain later. But the main way to get points in this game is to build these huts down here. These are going to be filled with points that the players are going to try to achieve. Once you laid out the main board, make sure you put all the resources that are in the game in their appropriate spots. The food here, the wood in the forest, bricks in the clay pit, stone in the quarry, and gold in the river. Then there's these stacks of what are known as tool tokens. Make sure you take them and you put them by the toolsmith. They come in stacks of 1 and 3, and you basically lay them out with the 1s here and the 3s here. Now they are double-sided. There's a 2 on the back of the 1s and a 4 on the back of the 3s, but when setting up the game, put the stacks with their 1s and their 3 sides facing up. Next, you're going to need to set up the huts. To set up the huts, you're going to have to shuffle these tiles into stacks of 7 and place them in these spots depending on how many players are in the game. I'm going to set up for a 4-player game, so you fill all 4 spots with 7 tiles each. Over here is what's called the civilization cards. The civilization cards come in a deck that's this here, and basically these are all cards that can provide a variety of benefits when you collect them. They can just give you resources, or they can give you food, they can increase your technology, they can give you straight up points, they can let you play lottery if you want to. Each of these civilization cards also have an image on the bottom that will represent a different way to score at the end of the game. For example, this one will allow you to get points based on how much agriculture you have over here. Then there are ones like these that have these green backgrounds. If you collect sets of them, you can earn points that way. Or you can gain points with this one, which depends on how many tools you have. There's a whole variety of ways to gain extra points with these cards. Each of these are going to cost a certain number of resources, and that depends on where they are on this little track. To set up the civilization card area, you take the top 4 cards of the deck and you flip them face up in the top 4 areas going right to left. Next, you need to set up the players. To set the players up, you need to give each player one of these civilization boards. Each of these boards has a spot for keeping your tools, the houses that you've obtained, and the civilization cards that you've collected throughout the game. Each of these boards also has a little chart right here with the different resources on it. That's going to help you determine how many of each resource you get. I'll explain that more later. Each player's color comes with 10 workers in total. At the start of the game, each player is going to have 5 workers. They will have an opportunity to get more workers as the game goes by. Each player is also going to have 12 food to start the game. Now you can do it in any combination you want, but typically you want to have 2 fish and a mushroom, representing in 5 and 2 respectively. Each player also gets 2 cubes that they will have. Then I apologize if this is hard to see on camera, but there are actually different sizes from each other. There's this small one here, which is going to be used to keep track of your agriculture level, and then this big one here is going to represent your score, which you will place right up here. Next, you need to take the top house of each stack and make sure you flip them over so that their resources required and their point values are showing. Give the start player marker to the youngest player and you are ready to begin. Every round is comprised of 3 phases: the worker placement phase, the action phase, and the feeding phase. During the worker placement phase, players are going to go around, starting with the first player, placing their workers out onto the board to claim the different areas to take the actions later. On your turn, you have to place at least one of your workers in one of the locations around the board. Each location has a series of circles represented there. This represents the maximum amount of workers that can be there. For example, the woods here can only hold 7. The only place that is not the case is the hunting grounds over here. It has this big circle right here. That means that any number of workers can go there. But the hunting ground is the only place where there is no limit. Every other place on the board has a limit. The woods can only have 7. The clay pit can only have 7. The toolsmith down here can only hold 1. The farmhouse can only hold 1. The individual buildings down here can only hold 1. And the civilization cards down here also can only hold 1. So like I said, on your turn you're going to take at least one of your workers and place it in a certain area to claim it to try and get whatever you want there. Now you are allowed to place multiple workers in an area if there is room for them. For example, there are 7 spots here. So if I wanted to, I could place 3 of my workers on the woods to try and get wood. Now it's important to keep in mind that once you place a worker there, you cannot on a later turn add more workers to it. Once you've placed the amount of workers that you have down in a certain spot, they're locked in. Obviously, once an area of workspaces is filled up, nobody else is allowed to play any workers in there for the rest of the round. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you do place workers in a certain area, do not, I repeat, do not take the action that is in that spot immediately. The actions on the board are resolved in the action resolution phase. Once a player has placed 1 or multiple workers in an area, his turn is over, and it's the next player's turn to place 1 or more of their workers in an area. Something else to keep in mind, if you're playing this game with 2 or 3 players, there are a little bit more restrictions on where the players can go. For example, if you're playing a 2-player game, only 1 player can claim one of the resource areas. Even if it's just by sending 1 worker to that area, only 1 player can claim it. So if red had gone here, even if so much as placed 1 worker, yellow could not on his turn also place any of his workers in that area because it has been fully claimed. Also, only 2 of these 3 town areas may be claimed. Now in a 3-player game, 2 players can occupy a resource area, but the restrictions for the towns remain the same. In a 4-player game, there are no restrictions. The worker placement phase ends when all the players have run out of workers to place. Then we move on to the action resolution phase. Starting with the first player for the round, each player is going to go around resolving all the actions that they've placed their workers on. And the player whose turn it is has to resolve all their actions before the next player can go. I'm going to explain what these 3 town buildings do first because those are the easiest to explain. So the tool hut is how you're going to increase your technology. So when you take your worker off, you're also going to take the lowest level tool that you have on your player board right here, and you're going to add that to one of the 3 slots. You can hold a maximum of 3 tool tokens on your board, but if all 3 of those are filled and you go to add another, then what you do is then you take one of those tool tokens and you flip it over to its next level. If you go to the tool spot and find that all 3 of your tool spots on your board have a 2 on them, take one of those off and then replace it with the 3. Only when those 3 are all 3s is when you can flip the 3s over into level 4s. The farmhouse right here will allow you to increase your agriculture. When you remove your worker from this area, you will take the agriculture marker that you have on this track and move it up 1. Now the reason why you would want to increase your agriculture is so that you will have less food that you'll need to pay at the end of each round. The hut lets you increase your workforce, which is why you need to place 2 workers here, because you will take both of these workers back, then take one of your workers from your open pool area, and you will place it with the workers that you've taken back. So you have just added a worker to your workforce. And having more workers will give you more options. However, the amount of food to feed them at the end of each round will also increase. I'll explain that later. To resolve an area that gets resources, food, wood, brick, stone, or gold, then you're going to need to roll dice. You're going to remove the workers that you have stationed in that area, and then roll a certain number of dice depending on how many workers you have there. You will roll 1 die for every worker in a location. For example, red had 2 workers here hunting for food. So he will remove these 2 workers, he will take these 2 dice, and put it in this cup. You don't have to use the cup if you don't want to, but from personal experience, I found it a lot more fun to use the cup. So you're going to roll those dice, and you're going to look at the values of the dice, and then determine how much you will actually get. To determine how much you get, you take the total number on the dice that you've rolled, in this case 11, and you divide it by the value of the resource that you're trying to get. For example, red was trying to get food. Food has a value of 2. You would then divide 2 by 11 in this case, and round down, so red would get 5 food. In another example, yellow is trying to get wood here. So he removes his 3 workers, he puts 3 dice in the cup, and he rolls them. He rolled a 5. He will then divide that total number by the value for the wood, which is 3. So in this case, rounding down, he will get 1 wood. Now if you had any tools on your player board, let's say for example yellow happened to have a level 1 tool on his board, you can actually take the tool, slide it over, meaning he won't be able to use it for the rest of the round, but it will allow him to add 1 result to the die roll, considering it is a level 1 technology. If he had a level 2 technology, he could do the same thing. Slide it over and add 2 to the die roll. You can also use multiple tools if you want to, provided that you do have them. For example, if the yellow player had happened to have 3 level 1s here, he could choose to slide all of them over and add 3 to his dice roll. The higher the die roll, the more resources you get. To obtain one of the civilization cards, you need to pay a certain number of resources indicated on top of the spots that the cards are on. So in this case, this red player here is on a spot that costs 1 resource. And the symbol that's on the spots mean that any resource can be used, except food. If you're unable or don't want to pay the resources to obtain the civilization cards, then you simply remove your worker from the card and nothing else happens. But, let's say in this case, red did want to get the card, and he had the resources. He would pay 1 resource of his choice back to the supply. In this case, he pays a wood, and then he would take the civilization card for himself. He immediately scores the award on the top of the card, which could be a variety of things, whether it's resources, food, the lottery, or in this case, points. And he will then take the card that he got, put it face down on this section of his player board, because each of these cards also has an endgame scoring area. Whether it's collecting sets of cards, or getting more workers with shamans, or scoring points based on your technology level. I'll explain what those are later, because right now I want to talk a little bit more about the lottery situation. When a player obtains a lottery card, is what I like to call it, every player in the game is going to get something. To determine who gets what, the player who obtained the card is going to take a number of dice equal to the number of players in the game, and he is going to roll them. Each player then, starting with the player who obtained the card, is going to go around and pick which one of the resources that they want to obtain. And each resource qualifies with a certain reward, and each one's going to go around until the last player gets left with the final option. To obtain one of the huts down here, you have to pay the resources listed on the tiles. Some of them are straightforward, like this one, you need a wood and 2 stone, and you'll get 13 points. Or this one, you need to pay a wood, a brick, and a stone, and you get 12 points. But some of the resources let the players choose what they want to spend to earn the points. For example, this one here means that the player has to spend 4 resources of a certain type in order to obtain this hut. For example, this one has to have 4 resources of one type. So you could spend 4 gold, 4 stone, 4 brick, or 4 wood to obtain this. But it has to be 4 the same kind. Rather, this one has to be 4 resources, and they have to be of 2 different types. And it could be any combination in quantity or number of the resources, or both, as long as it's of 2 different types, and the amount of resources used equal to 4. To calculate how many points the players get for these individual tiles, you take the number of resources used, and you multiply them by the resource's value. For example, let's say I got this one, and I used 2 wood and 2 brick. Well, the value of wood is 3, the value of brick is 4. I used 2 of each, so I would get 14 points for this tile. Immediately take your score marker, move it that many areas along the track, and you continue. When all the actions on the board have been taken, the players must now feed their people. To feed your people, count how many workers you currently have. Each worker that you have costs 1 food in order to feed them. So in this case, everybody starts out with 5 food. If that was how much that they had at the end of a round, then they would have to pay 5 food in order to successfully feed their people. If you can't pay the full amount of food to feed your people, you do have 2 options. The first option, you pay whatever food that you have left back to the area, and then you substitute the rest with resources, with 1 resource equaling 1 food. The other option, if you don't want to waste your resources, you pay whatever food you have left back to the area, and you lose 10 points. This is where the farming track comes in handy, because for every level that you're at on the farming track, you actually earn that much food at the end of a round, so it's essentially like getting a discount when feeding your people. Once everyone has fed their people, or not, and lost 10 points, the round is over and we prepare for the next round. To prepare for the next round, if there are any hut tiles that are still showing their back face, you take the top one and flip it over to form a new one that's become available. If there are any civilization cards that have been taken, you then take the rest of them, slide them over so that there are no empty ones before them. This means that the more expensive ones down here can become cheaper as the game goes on. You then take whatever number of cards needed on the top of the civilization card deck, and you flip them over to replace any ones that are missing. If nobody had taken a hut or civilization card, then you do nothing. Once anything that needed replaced is replaced, a new round begins. Players will continue to play rounds, placing their workers, gathering resources, getting buildings and cards, until the game ends. And the game ends in one of 2 ways. The first way is at the end of a round, when 1 stack of these housing tiles are empty. The other way the game can end is if there are not enough cards to refill the stack again at the end of a round. The other way the game can end is if there are not enough civilization cards to fill the display again. If that's the case, the game is over immediately. When the game ends, each player is going to calculate their final scores, and this is where the bottom half of all the civilization cards that you've collected over the course of the game will come into play. However, when it comes to final scoring, you ignore the top part of the civilization cards. Those no longer apply. For example, this card has a builder on it. The builder will score 1 point for every building that you've built over the course of the game. Now there are multiples of these in different types. Going back on the building example, this card has 2 builders on it, meaning that it will score 2 points for every building that you've gotten at the end of the game. Or this one has 3 builders, meaning each building you've had at the end of the game will score you 3 points. And you can have a combination of these. For example, at the end of the game, I could have 5 total builders, meaning that every hut that I've gotten at the end of the game would be worth an extra 5 points to me. But in the case of this example, this player only managed to get 1, so he will score measly 1 point for each building. These shaman cards will get you points for the amount of shamans that you have times the amount of workers that you have at the end of the game. So if by the end of the game, let's say I had 3 shamans at the end, and I still had my 5 workers that I started with, I would have a total of 15 bonus points. These toolmaker cards will score you points for however many toolmakers that you have in total times your total tool value. For example, I have 2 toolmakers in total at the end of the game, and a total tool value of 4. Well, 2 times 4 is 8, so I get 8 bonus points. These farmer cards will give you bonus points depending on the total number of farmers that you have times your current farm level. For example, I finished the game with 2 farmers. I multiply that by my level, which is at 4, so I would get 8 bonus points. There's also these green background cards that have different symbols on them. To get points for these, you basically just multiply the different symbols on the cards by themselves. For example, I have 3 green background cards with a different symbol. So I multiply here the cards I have by 3, 3 times 3, so I get 9 bonus points for these cards. If you end up with any duplicates of a card, for example, I have a duplicate of this rice here, then the duplicates are worth an extra point and you cannot score a second set. Any resources that you have at the end of the game will also score you 1 point. For example, I had 4 resources at the end of the game. I trade those in for 4 extra points. Food does not count when totaling the final scores. Once you've determined all the bonus points, you count up your total values, and whoever has the most points is the winner. In the case of a tie, the tied player with the highest total of food production, tools, and people is the winner. And that's everything you need to know in order to play Stone Age. As always, if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I will get to them. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up. That means a lot to me. If you like what I do and you want to support me in the future, please feel free to hit subscribe. And I will see you all in the next video. But until next time, see you later!